Thank you for speaking with us.
Thank you very much. Good morning.
Mr. Nasralla, the final results of last Sunday's election were announced several hours ago. Thank you very much for choosing to speak with us. What's your first reaction?
What's going on here is that the Electoral Tribunal recounted the votes from only 1,006 polling stations, even though there are 18,100 in the country. And we have no idea how they chose these polling stations. That's why we request, first, that they explain how they chose them, and whether these votes came from paper ballots sent after the 26th of November. 71% of votes were cast electronically, and within this 71%, I was ahead by 5 points. The remaining 29% were not cast electronically. These were paper ballots that were then brought to the Electoral Tribunal, and the tribunal falsified them. The 29% of votes that were cast as paper ballots were completely manipulated.
While analyzing the ballots last night, you could see that some of them didn't have a fold down the middle. Why is this an important detail?
The tribunal committed two types of fraud. When it printed out the voting ballots, it didn't print the right amount, but instead printed far more than were needed. And in the polling stations, they always set up someone on the very last table, table number 9, someone who would validate the ballots and draw the cross himself next to the chosen candidate's name. And that person would then put the ballots into the ballot box without folding them, even though when a person votes, they always fold their ballot 3 times. And on top of this, every voter has to sign their ballot, as well as the voting register. So what I'm saying is that the tribunal planned to steal these votes before the election even began, in the polling stations where they knew that votes would be cast mostly as paper ballots. So they put 2 votes per person into the ballot boxes, and when the boxes arrived at the tribunal on Monday, they simply removed the votes that didn't suit them. These are the original ballots, but filled in the way they wanted. That is to say, voting for Juan Orlando Hernandez, who's the head of the Electoral Tribunal. This is something we've been calling out for 5 years already. The Electoral Tribunal is President Hernandez's lackey. It is not an independent entity.
The results have been announced, but not Hernandez's victory. What are you going to do? Will you contest the results?
We had meetings all week with the Organization of American States, with the European Union and the American Embassy, who are here as observers. And the OAS, as well as the EU, have agreed that to validate and endorse the results, they'd need to analyze the ballots from 5,174 polling stations, which corresponds to the 29% of votes that were physically brought to the Electoral Tribunal. Anyone can see that when a candidate like myself has a 5-point lead, meaning they're 118,000 votes ahead, after 71% of electronic ballots have been chosen at random from the entire country and counted, it's impossible that this lead would then switch over to the other candidate once the remaining 29% of ballots have been counted. This is armed robbery. It's illegal.
Will you contest these results?
Of course, and the most important thing is that the American Embassy, the EU, the OAS completely agree with our demands to carry out a full analysis of the votes cast by paper ballot.
This uncertainty brought about many tensions last week throughout the country. What do you have to say to your supporters who came down into the streets to protest?
I took part in these peaceful protests for 4 hours. It was in Tegucigalpa, but there were some across the entire country. I'd say that 80% of the population expressed themselves in this way on Sunday, whether in villages or in cities. They were peaceful protests. But the problem is that last week the government tried to infiltrate the marches with soldiers in uniform. Then they started stealing from shops, and in the media they say it's our fault. We have videos where you can see people leaving the march accompanied by soldiers to go looting nearby shops. Of course, I'm not saying that petty delinquents did not join in with these acts of vandalism. They made the most of the looting to try get their share. But they belong to no political party.
Are you calling on your supporters to continue protesting?
Of course, it's all we have. When the government has control over the Electoral Tribunal, the Supreme Court, and law enforcement, the only thing people have is to make themselves heard in the street.
Thank you very much, Mr. Nasralla.
And thank you.
Muchas gracias.